Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft review of this from Herpa, the Antonov 225. Yes, it is the largest successful aircraft ever. Full stop. And by successful aircraft, I mean something that flew more than once and got out of ground effect while it was at it. So, what is this thing? Why does it exist? We're going to get into all of that. All you need to know for the moment is that I've got it here in 1/400 scale by Herpa. It's the first time on the channel that we're taking a look at a Herpa model, so we'll talk a little bit about that and some of the differences that this model has relative to some other manufacturers in 1/400 scale. But just behold this thing for a moment. It is the biggest, the heaviest, not the longest, but nearly the longest. Not the widest wingspan, but nearly the widest wingspan. And of course, it is probably the most impressive aircraft ever when it comes to its overall payload capacity. We can have a takeoff weight of over 1.6 million pounds on this thing. It is absolutely immense, and it hails from the waning years of the Cold War, in the waning years of the Soviet Union as well. Why does this thing exist? Well, long and short, Cold War, rockets, and transporting rockets. Yeah, this thing meant business back in the day, and now, as a commercial aircraft in cargo service, it still means business. It means a lot of business, actually, for Antonov Airlines, who operate the one and only AN225 currently in existence. It is a sight to behold, and it is seen all around the world on cargo operations for private customers, for governments, for militaries, what have you. The 225 has probably carried it at one point or another. It has set numerous world records in terms of long-range flying, in terms of heavy payload flying. It has lofted the heaviest single-item payload ever put on an aircraft, 187.5 tons or so for an electrical generator that had to go to Australia. Absolutely remarkable stuff that this aircraft is capable of doing, and it's an absolutely remarkable aircraft as well that hails from an era in which all sorts of groundbreaking things were happening in terms of aeronautical engineering. It comes from the Cold War era, and of course we all know what happened with technology in that period between 1945 and 1991, 1992 or so. So, sit back, relax, and take a look at the Antonov 225 rendered here in 1/400 scale by Herpa. Before we take a closer look at this rather large model, let's take a closer look at the rather large box in which it comes. Coming in from screen, alright, there we go. Yeah, we're not going to be able to get this whole box into frame due to the close range, but there is the Herpa box for the Antonov 225. Yes, Herpa miniature models, or so it says in German there at the bottom left. Bottom right, there's the Herpa logo. Very cool. And then we have got ourselves a picture of the 225 loading up there with, well, probably some sort of generator or something in that rather interesting casement there. But there it is. Antonov Airlines AN225 Mrija 1/400. The Antonov Airlines logo, 30 years of breaking records. Yep, cool. This, of course, is the largest aircraft currently flying, and it's the largest successful aircraft ever to fly. So, yeah, it's definitely record-breaking. Side panel of the box, here we go. Some more typical stuff here. True to scale aircraft model, Antonov Airlines, Antonov AN225 Mrija, registration Uniform Romeo 82060. There's the barcode, and then the Herpa logo there, and then the Herpa website. Obviously, that would be their German language website. Top panel of the box, there's another picture of the 225 loading up. And then we have got more information about the aircraft, just reiterating what we already had on the other side panel. Herpa 1/400 side panel that I open it from. Here we go. This is obviously German, true to detail, airplane model. Yes, if my German is any good, that's what that says there. Very nice, very nice. And then the Herpa website again. Back of the box, what do we have here? Another picture of the 225, just on the stand there, on 400. 30 years breaking records since 1989. And then we have got ourselves some information here in assorted languages. Looks like we have got German, English, French, Italian, Spanish, and Dutch. Cool. Small scale and lifelike model for adult collectors. Not suitable for children under 14 years! Exclamation point. Interesting. Cool. And the other languages say, yes, more more or less the same thing. Let's look at the Italian and Spanish to verify that. Yep, cool. Very, very nice. And then, of course, the contact information for Herpa if you do feel like getting into contact with them. Unlike some other Herpa boxes that I have seen, and very much like Gemini Jet's boxes, we do have a Look Inside tab, but don't call it a Look Inside tab. If we flip it up, first of all, there's the void in which the aircraft would be sitting. And we also have this write-up here, given to us in German and English, and they do say more or less the same things. It reads, powered by 6 Progress Design Bureau motor, that's a typo right there, yes, but powered by 6 Progress Design Bureau D18T turbofans producing 230 kilonewtons of thrust each. The AN225 performed its maiden flight on 22nd December 1988. Originally designed to support the Soviet space program, including the carrying of the Buran shuttle, the AN-225 is the world's largest aircraft. Civil certification of the aircraft was completed in 2001, and the first commercial flight took off from Stuttgart that year. The Antonov AN-225 has gone on to set more than 100 world records, including the heaviest total cargo, 5 military tanks at 253.8 tons total, the heaviest single piece, a generator at 187.6 tons, and probably the longest rigid piece, 2 windmill blades, each 42 meters long. Virtually self-sufficient with a range of 15,000 kilometers, requiring no ground support equipment, and equipped with nose loading ramp, internal overhead traveling cranes of 30 tons capacity, and 2 30 kilonewton capacity winches, the AN-225 provides a unique capability for transporting cargo, especially oversized items, by air. Operated by Antonov Airlines, the airline of its Ukrainian designers, the AN-225 has proven its value and capability in relief operations following natural and environmental disasters such as Hurricane Katrina, the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, as well as in support of industrial and infrastructure projects around the world. Cool. So we've got some typographical and slight grammatical issues here with the English version of this description. I would assume that they have translated it as conservatively as possible from the German, which I assume to be the original one here, from Herpa being a German company. But, yeah, sich is not an English word, last time I checked. Other than that, though, okay. But it does give you some decent information about the aircraft, and that's the most important thing about a box description, in my opinion, and, yeah, pretty well intelligible, and it does seem to give some good information. Some additional information and specifications about the 225. What is this absolutely enormous bird? Why does it exist, and what's it doing nowadays? Well, first of all, the 225, it is one of one. Originally, it was designed to service the Soviet space program, specifically the Buran space shuttle program. Of course, the United States, they debuted the space shuttle as we came to know it in 1981 with the first flight of Columbia on STS-1. The Soviet Union and the United States were embroiled in a little thing called the Cold War at the time, and part of the Cold War was a technological race and an arms race, and part of those two respective races was superiority of air and space. The Soviet Union drew first blood in that fight with the launch of Sputnik on October 4th, 1957. The United States followed up later on with a couple of failed satellite launches, and then they got a satellite up. Yuri Gagarin made his first flight in 1961, the first human in space, the first human to orbit Earth. The United States fired back with a few flights of their own, and eventually it culminated in the first manned lunar landing on July 20th, 1969, on the flight of Apollo 11. That did not end, though, necessarily with the first lunar landing. That continued all the way up to about 1990, 1991, with ultimately the collapse of the Soviet Union. The arms race started to take a different form. Of course, you had weapons systems that were constantly being developed, and a lot of the space program was actually supplemented and supported by that arms race and the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles being repurposed into manned-rated carrier rockets. But there was also a fight in the air, not just in space. The United States, of course, had a whole bunch of reconnaissance aircraft that could fly at high speed and high altitude, or either or, really, with the SR-71 Blackbird and the U-2 spy plane because, well, we're developing satellites, but also we want aircraft getting a little bit closer, but we want to be undetected, stealth technology, all kinds of things like that. Ultimately, that high-speed aerodynamic research culminated in the space shuttle on the American side, and not wanting to be outdone, the Soviet Union, of course, had to have a space shuttle of their own. So they developed the Buran, which only flew once, and it never carried a crew. It was an entirely automated flight, controlled from on board as well as from the ground. The program ran out of money, and not long thereafter, the Soviet Union collapsed. However, for the space shuttle, we needed to transport this thing. We Americans needed to transport this thing. So what did we do? We used a 747. We already had it. It was adequate for the job. It worked great. And we used 747s to transport the space shuttle, usually from Edwards Air Force Base in California back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida after an alternate site landing at Edwards Air Force Base. The Soviets, though, they didn't have a 747 of their own. So what did they do? Did they try to buy a 747? No. Did they try to copy a 747? No. Instead, they built the largest aircraft the world has ever seen. And what I mean there, in big asterisks, is the largest aircraft the world has ever seen that has actually been successful, and as in flying more than one time. And that is the Antonov 225 as we see it. Of course, its country of origin is the Soviet Union. Nowadays, you would say that this aircraft is actually from Ukraine and not Russia, because the Antonov Design Bureau, it was relocated to Kiev in the 1960s, I want to say. And then, of course, it continued operations from there through the Soviet times, and it continues to operate as Antonov Airlines today out of Ukraine, which explains the livery on this aircraft. We do have the Ukrainian national colors quite prominently featured on this livery. We have the gold and blue there. However, this is one of one. Because the Buran program ran out of steam, there was really no longer a need to continue to produce aircraft that could transport these space shuttle orbiters. So they built the one, and only the one. And this is the aircraft that you see here, registration Uniform Romeo 82060. The aircraft first flew in 1988 on December 21st. The airframe was actually more or less completed by 1985. But, as you can see, there was a little bit of a delay there in terms of getting this thing off the ground for the first time. The aircraft was developed from the Antonov 124, which is also a very large cargo transport aircraft. But that one's got 4 engines. This one has got 6. Yeah, absolutely insane specs. Speaking of the specs, more specifically, what do we have here? The aircraft is going to be crewed by a flight crew of 6. Yeah, 6 people there in the cockpit. Obviously, we've got pilots for flying the aircraft, we've got navigators, we've got flight engineers, and probably load masters as well, just to monitor the center of gravity and other conditions that are going on in that absolutely immense cargo bay on this aircraft. Overall dimensions, the length is 84 meters, that's 275 feet 7 inches. The wingspan is 88.4 meters, that's 290 feet exactly. The height is 18.1 meters, that's 59 feet 5 inches, measuring from the bottom of the main gear to the top of the tail there. We've got a very interesting tail on this aircraft. Overall wing area is 905 square meters, that's 9,740 square feet. Aspect ratio on the wings is 8.6. Empty weight on this thing. This is where the numbers really start to get crazy. The empty weight is 285,000 kilograms. That's 628,317 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, 640,000 kilograms. That's 1,410,958 pounds. Fuel capacity rated here as more than 300,000 kilograms. That's 661,000 pounds. The cargo hold, though, this is where this airplane quite literally earns its money. Overall volume of the cargo bay on this aircraft is 1,300 square meters. That translates to 46,000 cubic feet. Overall dimensions on the cargo bay, it is 43.35 meters long, that's 142.2 feet. It's 6.4 meters wide, that's 21 feet, and it's 4.4 meters or 14 feet tall. That's big, and of course that's all an enclosed area on board the aircraft. The engines on this aircraft, they are the Progress D18T turbofan engines. They produce 229.5 kilonewtons of thrust each. That's 51,600 pound-feet of thrust at sea level. And there are 6 of them, as you could quite obviously see. performance characteristics on the AN-225. The maximum speed is 850 kilometers per hour. That's 530 miles per hour or 460 knots indicated airspeed. The cruising speed is 800 kilometers per hour. That's 500 miles per hour or 430 knots. Overall range is 15,400 kilometers. That's 9,600 miles or 8,300 nautical miles. And that's with the maximum fuel load on board, but assuming an empty payload. The range with 200 tons of payload mined, that's 4,000 kilometers or 2,500 miles. Service ceiling on the aircraft is 11,000 meters or 36,000 feet. The maximum wing loading that the aircraft can put on the wings and still safely function, that's 662.9 kilograms per square meter or 135.8 pounds per square foot. Thrust-to-weight ratio on the AN-225 is 0.234. So we're not going to be doing any 1G standing starts at the end of the runway, but we do have quite ample power in order to get this thing off the ground, along with about 200 tons of nominal payload capacity and a full fuel load. It's an absolute superlative generator. It's the largest, it's the heaviest, it's got one of the longest wingspans in the world, it's one of the longest aircraft straight up in the world, it's got the longest payload bay and the largest payload bay of any aircraft in the world. It's absolutely insane what this aircraft is, and the fact that it was all put together 30 years ago and it is still the largest successful aircraft flying today, oh my. It is an absolute superlative generator, and it's quite interesting when we start to look at the details on the model and the details in the overall design of the aircraft. It's very, very cool to see the innovations that the Soviet designers came up with in this era, and it's really a hallmark of Russian and Soviet design in general, because a lot of times the design houses that came up with these aircraft, they were facing budget cuts, financial shortages, as well as material shortages, and a technological deficit compared to the West, because the Soviet Union, although they were pioneers in aerospace design really all the way through the 1960s, they really started to lag behind the Western world thereafter, so they had to get inventive in order to make these things do what they needed, and we see a lot of that here on the Antonov 225. Let's take a closer look at this model. Right, what do we have going on here on this 1/400th scale Antonov 225? Well, there's a lot going on here. First of all, this is the first time that we have taken a look at a Herpa model on the channel. It's not the only Herpa I have, but it is one of only 2 Herpas that I have. So I'm not quite as familiar with this brand as I am with some of the others that we have taken a look at previously, but for what we have here, I've got to say that it is very nicely put together. The construction is die-cast throughout, but we do have a few departures from what we see on models from other companies like NG and Gemini Jets, for example, and probably the biggest departure here is the landing gear. The landing gear are all in plastic and they are static. They do not roll at all, which perhaps is a little bit of a detractor for some people, but I do understand why they have chosen to go in that direction, and the other Herpa model I have also has static landing gear. It looks good enough, it looks to be more or less scale correct, but it is entirely fixed, no rolling wheels whatsoever, so just be aware of that if you are going to be looking at this model or another Herpa model. I believe a lot of them, if not all of them, may have fixed landing gear. But all of that aside, what do we have? Well, it is die-cast throughout, and it is very heavy, therefore. I weighed this thing. It weighs 15.7 ounces. So, yes, it's the heaviest 1/400 scale model that I have. It's heavier than the Airbus A380 that we took a look at some months ago by about 2 ounces. So it is almost an entire pound in weight in 1/400 scale. So it gives you an idea of just the extent of the die-cast construction in this thing. Everything that you see here, aside from the pylons and the engine nacelles and landing gear, is die-cast. So yes, very good construction throughout on this thing. The other details that we have here, though, graphically, looks real good. First of all, you can see the livery, and we've taken a look at that livery from all angles so far. You can see that it is predominantly white, but it also does have the colors of the Ukrainian flag here quite prominently featured. We've got the yellow and the blue in the form of a cheat line that extends all the way down from the nose to the tail cone on the aircraft, and it is reiterated a little bit there on the vertical stabilizers there at the rear. You can see the Antonov Airlines logo, as well as another reiteration of that Ukrainian flag colors there. Additionally, the graphics there on the side, International Cargo Transporter, and you have telephone, fax, and email contact for Antonov Airlines there. You can also see Antonov 225 there on the side of the nose, port side, and also the name of this aircraft, Mrija, there written in Cyrillic script, of course. Being a Ukrainian aircraft, and Ukrainian is written in Cyrillic, as well as several other Slavic languages, which of course are the lingua franca of the former Soviet bloc and of course Russia today. Graphics-wise, what else do we have? We've got the cockpit windows. They look pretty good there, just done there in that black tampo printing, but you can see the window glazing and of course the boundaries between all the windows. It looks good. Also, you can see the very prominent shut line separating that openable nose panel from the rest of the fuselage. Nothing opens on this model. It's not one of those, shall we say, a Gemini Jets type interactive series. Everything is static and fixed here, but the shut lines there that they have given us, they do look good. The lines are crisp, nothing is smudged. I can't see any really noticeable breaks in any of those lines where they should not be. So all in all, it does look pretty good. Additionally, you can see that we have got some doors here on the lower port side of the fuselage. That all looks good. And additionally, you can see the nose landing gear. Nice lines as the fuselage starts to expand out laterally toward the wing root. You can see there with our top-mounted wing there. Very, very cool. And then moving into the leading edge of the wing with our leading edge slats and all three port side engines you can see here. And as we continue to move outboard on the wing, you can see how the cross-section thins out as we get to the wing tip there, with a red strobe here being the port side wing. And the extreme wingtip is painted red there, I assume, just to aid a little bit in visibility for the ground crews, because that probably does blend in a little bit with the rear section of the wing being painted white. Main landing gear visible there. You can see all of them. Of course, they are all fixed, all static, but you can see the landing gear with the obviously open landing gear doors with the landing gear extended in this ground configuration. Yes, very, very nice. Across the top side, and we'll take a closer look at this later on, but you can see the mounting pylons for oversized external payload. And remember, this aircraft was designed to carry the Buran shuttle orbiter, so that's where they would be carrying the shuttle orbiter, over top, piggyback, just like the United States did with their 747-derived shuttle carrier aircraft. However, the Soviets, they decided to build an entirely new plane for the job rather than retrofit something that was already in existence, because they really didn't have anything over there in the Soviet world that could accommodate carrying an oversized payload like that, like a shuttle orbiter. So that's where the aircraft came from. Moving the rears, you can see that we have got more blisters up top for antennas and probably other support equipment for the onboard gantry cranes that are in the payload bay as well. And then, of course, we get rearward toward our empennage here with the very, very unusual empennage arrangement. You can see here that we have got a twin tail. We've got twin vertical stabilizers, and the horizontal stabilizer is a single piece that just extends outboard and raked back somewhat. And the reason that they went for this design was, remember, this aircraft was designed to carry a shuttle orbiter on its back, which meant that you're going to have a lot of aerodynamic interference brought on by that payload, which in and of itself is an aircraft. Basically, it's a spacecraft, but it functions as an aircraft as well. So that payload is going to be generating its own aerodynamic forces. It's going to be generating lift of its own, and therefore it's going to be generating turbulence of its own. Because, of course, anytime that we do something with airflow, we also elicit an equal and opposite reaction from the ways that we're manipulating that airflow. So one of those equal and opposite reactions is vortices. So you get wingtip vortices, you get the vortex sheet that is also emanated from behind anything moving through the air, really, but aircraft, with the ways in which they're working the flow to generate the forces that they need from it, they're really going to be eliciting a whole bunch of turbulent flow in their wake. So one of the things that they did to try and combat this was to use this split empennage with the twin vertical stabilizers and the very low and wide horizontal stabilizer. If you look at the counterpart, the Western counterpart to this aircraft, the shuttle carrier aircraft 747, they did not get rid of the vertical stabilizer that comes standard with the 747, but they did do something similar as auxiliary winglets and end fences there, flanking either side, port and starboard, of the main vertical stabilizer on the 747. And again, that was to try and straighten out the flow coming off of the space shuttle orbiter being carried piggyback on the 747, just like Buran would have been carried on this aircraft, trying to remove some of the turbulent wake from the shuttle orbiter as it moved back toward the vertical stabilizer on the 747. It really made the aircraft a lot more stable, returned a lot of the rudder authority on the aircraft. So again, different designs altogether, but they settled upon very similar solutions to very similar problems with it, trying to split the empennage to control the turbulent wake coming off of the payloads that would be carried over top of the aircraft. So interesting to see all of that, and of course, that's why they did what they did. Does this really have a function in terms of how the aircraft operates today? No. Because obviously this thing is not going to be carrying cargo piggyback anymore. At least I don't think they've carried anything piggyback on this aircraft aside from the Buran orbiter. But theoretically they could, and they do have the aerodynamic accommodations in order to do something like that. Coming in nose on here at the 225, there we go. And here you can get a great idea of the overall disposition of the fuselage cross-section. You can see that we have got this oblong, very nearly egg-shaped profile here in cross-section from nose on. Obviously you can see how wide this aircraft is, and you can also see how tall it is. Speaking of that nose landing gear, and you can see that we've got a twin nose gear here just to distribute the immense weight of this thing fully loaded a little bit more efficiently. The nose gear also, like we talked about on the C-5, another transport aircraft with a military purpose, just as this one had a military purpose when it was conceived, the nose gear here, they can collapse on their struts to allow the nose to kneel down and basically touch the ground so that when they open up the main cargo door, which is the nose, it just flips up, as we saw in the picture from the box. They are able to extend ramps out from the nose, which means that they can drive wheeled cargo into the aircraft. So trucks, military vehicles, such as tanks that they've carried in this thing, they're able to just drive them on board. And anything else that is not powered or wheeled, they're able then to use other loading trucks, or the aircraft's onboard cranes are then able to intercept these things as they cross the ramps into the cargo bay, and then the aircraft's own infrastructure can then shuttle it around fore and aft in the bay to get it down to where they need it to be for weight distribution, and then of course the load masters and other personnel can go in there and secure everything so it doesn't shift around in flight, because that could very well be disastrous. But generally you can see the overall disposition of the cross-sectional profile of the fuselage, and it looks good. Additionally, you can see from another angle the cockpit windows. They all look pretty good. Very nice. We'll set the focus there for the cockpit windows if we can get it to settle down. Can we? Doesn't really look like it. Okay, camera, do your thing, please. Right. So, anyway, yep. Graphics across the nose. You can see how the two cheat lines converge there across the nose tip. Looking nice. They meet up nicely and symmetrically, no problems. And then moving outboard toward the wing root area. There you go. You can see a little bit of a seam between the wing root and the actual wing spar as the wings actually start to move outboard. But looks good enough in my opinion, and also you can see up top side here the two mounting pylons for what would have been the Buran shuttle orbiter when the aircraft was in military service. Moving outboard, there you go on the port wing with your three engines. That all looks good. You can see that we do have fan blade detail in there with the engines. Looking nice. Really no bypass to speak of in terms of a visible gap between the nacelle and the fan there through the compressor stages of the engine, but looks good. They're not pass-throughs or anything. Looking good nonetheless, though, in terms of authenticity, with the fan blades being rendered and recognizable on the starboard wing, with the starboard engines the same. And it's just a really interesting proportion to see three jet engines mounted under a wing. It's not something that we see too often. So when we do see it, it is a noteworthy thing. Very cool. And then, of course, moving back towards centerline and moving up, you can see the empennage there. You don't see a vertical stabilizer where you'd expect to see one. It's just open, empty space, again, as we talked about, for the aerodynamic accommodation of oversized payloads being carried topside. But you can see the twin vertical stabilizers there, doubling as end fences for the horizontal stabilizer to try and contain any wingtip vortices being generated by payload being carried over top. Very cool. Outboard there, leading edge of the port wing, there is the red strobe that we remarked about earlier, and then the starboard wing there, with its green strobe just visible on the wingtip. Nicely done, Herpa. Very, very nicely done. So far, no real complaints, just an observation about the landing gear being fixed on this bird. From the starboard side of the Antonov 225, there we go. First of all, nose section and forward fuselage. There we are. International Cargo Transporter plainly visible there. Antonov 225. Cockpit windows. And then, of course, the shut line for that big nose hatch. You don't have the name of the aircraft or the Ukrainian flag on the starboard side. We only see that on the port side, but the other information down there with the fax and phone number and email address also visible there. Not sure you'll be able to make that out on the video, but it is there and it is legible. Moving aft. There we go, our starboard wing visible there with our 3 starboard engines, and then our wingtip there with the green strobe. Side-on view of the pylons that would be there for carrying the Buran orbiter, main landing gear with the doors, and then there's our registration, Uniform Romeo 82060. Toward the bottom side of the fuselage, you can see these exhaust outlets, and there's another one on the port side of the aircraft in the same place. These must be for the auxiliary power units on board or whatever else is there to support the payload bay. We remarked about something very similar on the C5, and I later found out that that was for APU exhaust. So I'm assuming a similar arrangement here on the Antonov 225, which is, of course, a macrocosmically similar aircraft to the C5, but larger. Very much so. Moving up here and aft, there is the empennage there, our twin vertical stabilizers, and the very wide and long horizontal stabilizer. But nice detail there. You can see the shut lines there for the rudder control surfaces, and obviously you have a doubling of all of those surfaces on the other vertical stabilizers. So they operate symmetrically and in pairs. So when we get, for example, a right rudder input from the cockpit, you'll have both rudders deflecting at the same time on both sides of the aircraft. So you'll maintain symmetrical control, and again, this is just trying to smooth out aerodynamic protuberances that are generated by things being carried topside. Although I don't think the aircraft is ever going to do that again. Very, very nicely done, though. I mean, the graphics look great. The paint is good. I don't see any paint flaws anywhere. On the starboard side, again, you can see that we have got an aft door back here. Then moving back forward, don't have any other doors here visible on the starboard side in terms of egress or ingress, but very nice. And of course the main entrance to the aircraft is going to be the nose section there with entering the payload bay. So that would open, and the shut lines for all of that are plainly visible and look nice. Very, very good. Quite pleased. Tail on view now of the 225. There we go. That's an interesting proportion. Yep. Big gap there where you'd expect a vertical stabilizer to be, and just opened up to the airflow is everything forward of there. And obviously you can see just the width of this thing. The empennage here in terms of the horizontal stabilizer, this is the wingspan on something like a 737. So it's absolutely enormous. I mean, if you could put a 737 on top of this thing, the 225 would carry it comfortably and still have room for stuff inside the payload bay. Absolutely wild. But nonetheless, you can see the overall disposition of the empennage, and plainly visible you can see just how the airflow would just come across the top and then be funneled through here, and then you get your end fences doubling as your rudder control surfaces, and then obviously all of your elevator authority is going to be handled here with our control surfaces on the trailing edge, which you just might be able to see the shut lines for some of those control surfaces. Yep, there you go. See the shut lines running through here for your elevator control surfaces. Very, very cool. Trailing edge of the port wing, you can also see control surface shut lines here for our slats and spoilers. That looks good. And obviously we'll have trailing edge flaps as well. You can also see the little pontoons or nacelles here for enclosing the armature there for operating the trailing edge flaps and slats. Very, very nice. Across the center section of the fuselage, you can see the tail cone, how everything tapers back down there to a very nice slim point. And then, of course, the rear section of the main fuselage with the disposition of our main landing gear clearly visible there. You can see how the landing gear doors in their open configuration there, they flank the struts of the landing gear quite nicely. And then moving outboard on the starboard wing, very nice. You can also see some of the details there on the underside of the wing, in addition to the top side with our shut lines there for our spoilers, mainly our air spoilers for our speed brakes, and then our ground spoilers for when we land. We would use those for deceleration upon landing. Very, very nicely put together here. Everything looks very crisp and clean. Very nice modeling here, all in all, by Herpa. And profile view now from the port side. Moving down a little bit. There we are. Toward the nose, there are the graphics once again. I don't know if I'll be able to get any closer than this while maintaining our focus. I don't think we can. No, we got to pull it back ever so slightly. But there you go, International Cargo Transporter. I want to give you a chance to see if you can read the graphics anyway. Not sure if you'll be able. Perhaps we'll have to link up to some high-resolution pictures of that. But it is all legible, and I do believe that that still is the current and correct contact information for Antonov Airlines. So if you've got some outsized cargo to move, well, you can give them a call and see what they can do for you. But obviously, you have got your ingress-egress door there on the bottom forward section of the port fuselage. Very nice. Struts and wheel assembly for the nose landing gear. And then moving out toward our wing spar and wing root area. You can see we've got a little nacket duct in this area. That's cool. And then we get into our wing structure with our engines and then our leading edge of the wing. The shut lines for our leading edge slats cleanly and clearly visible. And then out to the wing tip. Looking good. Across the top side of the fuselage, you can see here that we have got the pylons and again our little blisters for antennas and probably other equipment, once again for supporting the cargo bay and crane operations inside. And then we get our empennage here. Very, very nicely put together. Obviously, you can see the complementary control surface shut lines here on the port side of the empennage. Very nice. And then, of course, we also have a little termination here and a point on either side there, probably housing some of the armature for actuating the rudder, I would say. Very, very impressive, though, all around, I've got to say, not only from Herpa, but from the Antonov Design Bureau, because, whoa, it's the biggest aircraft ever to be successful in terms of flying multiple times and not just sort of floating on ground effect. Yes, I'm talking about you, Spruce Goose. Yeah, absolutely remarkable that this thing could fly at all, never mind be successful. And, you know, being built in 1985, first flying in 1988, you've got yourself some history behind this thing now, and it is still the only one in existence. I did hear that there is a second airframe that was partially completed in the era, but the program really ran out of steam because the Buran program ran out of steam after flying only once with no crew on board. So the Soviet Union said, well, we can invest our money elsewhere, and eventually the Soviet Union ceased to exist. But there is another airframe that is about 60 to 70% complete based off of what I've read about it. There have been some bids by firms from China to try and complete that aircraft, either in Ukraine or try to build a third airframe in China, but not entirely sure of the status of those plans right now, and not entirely sure if we're ever going to see a second Antonov 225 ever take to the sky. So for the moment, it is one of one, and it probably will remain one of one for at least quite some time to come, if not forever. So yes, it's a very, very unique aircraft, used all around the world for all sorts of commercial and humanitarian purposes. The box mentioned that it's been involved with things like natural disaster relief. I do know that in 2020 the aircraft was called upon to transport medical supplies, so that's cool. So basically, first come, first served basis. It is a for-hire aircraft, of course, but it's doing some things that are benefiting a lot of people in all sorts of different sectors. So definitely, it's something that is very useful and something that is obviously still needed, even in this era where we're talking about the demise of the jumbos. The biggest jumbo ever, still very much a prized and hot commodity. Going freehand here just to get a little bit of a closer look at some of the details that perhaps we couldn't discern earlier from slightly farther away. There you go with your graphics there on the port side forward fuselage, and you can see plainly visible, the graphics there with our typeface, International Cargo Transporter, and there you go. You can see the phone number, the fax number, and the email. So, interesting that they would put that right on the side of the airplane, but who knows? Perhaps you've got people at an airport who would see that and say, we need to do some renovations around here, and we need a lot of building materials. Let's call these guys. So, who knows? Maybe it's probably the most unorthodox sales tactic ever, but it works. Obviously, you can see Antonov 225 and Mrija there in the Cyrillic text, flanked by the flag of Ukraine. Very nice, very nice. And then you get, of course, the logo of Antonov Airlines, NACA ducts there, just forward of the wing route. And then obviously moving outboard there on the port wing. 2 more wing tip. And our engines. Fan blade detail visible inside all 3 of them here on the port side. Looks real good. Top side. There's our nose and cockpit. And then moving rearward, you can see how the fuselage flares out to the wing spar area. And then you have got the pylons for mounting the Buran shuttle orbiter. Cool. All the blisters across the top of the fuselage, and then the empennage. Yes, very unique perspective there in terms of the overall geometries here. But it worked, and it still works. Cool. Top side of the starboard wing, you can see more of the shut lines there for our flaps and spoilers. Very nice. The nacelles here and the pylons to which they're mounted. Looking good, everything mounted flush. And top side of the port wing, the same shut lines reiterated there. Very nicely put together, all in all, from Herpa. Really no complaints about it, just observations, and mostly that's the landing gear. It is very, I don't want to say it's disappointing, but it's just different, perhaps a little bit underwhelming to have fixed gear on a model that is otherwise absolutely on par with what I've seen from other manufacturers. So it's just different. I don't know why they chose to make the gear fixed. It's probably easier on the production line, but it would have been cool to have all of that landing gear rollable, but it's not. Be that as it may, though, it's an absolutely wonderful model. It's the largest successful aircraft ever to fly, and it's going to be for the foreseeable future, I would say. So if you do want one, definitely the Herpa one is the one to get. I don't even know if other manufacturers make one of these, but if they do, take a good look at them, because the Herpa one is definitely good if you're willing to accept the fixed landing gear. So there it was, in 1/400th scale by Herpa, the Antonov 225 Mrija. What is there to say? It is just the biggest, most insane aircraft ever built. If we're talking about overall size, overall maximum takeoff weight, and overall maximum payload capacity. There's nothing bigger and better than this to date in all the world. So, yes, if you want the absolute biggest superlative generator in terms of overall size and overall cargo capacity, this is it. Nothing else even really comes all that close. Be that as it may, though, what do we have here as a model from Herpa? Well, in summation, I have to say it's very nice. It's a weighty thing. It weighs 15.7 ounces, as we mentioned, so it's heavy, and it's substantial, and it's almost entirely die-cast. The only plastic parts on this whole model are the landing gear, the engine nacelles, and the engine nacelle pylons that attach them to the wings. Other than that, everything you see here is die-cast through and through, and it looks absolutely spectacular. It's well constructed, nothing is loose on this thing. The engines are mounted firmly to the wings mounted very firmly to the fuselage, the empennage there with the very long horizontal stabilizer flanked by the 2 vertical stabilizers, absolutely wonderful. Everything is straight and level, no production faults in that regard. Nothing is loose, nothing is crooked, everything is just as you would expect it to be. Graphically, it's very good as well. Crisp tampo printing across everything. The colors are vibrant and they look correct as far as I can tell from the photographs that I've taken a look at in consultation with sources here, doing research on this, and everything just looks absolutely wonderful. The only thing I would say, again, we do have fixed static landing gear. They do not roll at all, and they are all in plastic. There's no rubber tire anywhere on this thing, unlike we've seen from some other manufacturers. So if that matters a lot to you, that could well be a deal breaker. But if you're simply looking for a very good otherwise representation of the AN225, here it is, 1/400 scale by Herpa. It's absolutely wonderful. Again, it's a weighty, substantial model. You definitely know that you've got some very good, real quality sitting there in your hand. So I gotta recommend it, really. 10 out of 10? Probably. Absolutely great. Until next time, though, I do hope that you have enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.